word security is very poorly defined. It's relative, it's subjective, and depending on the stratum of society that a family is in or a child is in, the definition of that security will vary. Right? But all parents and all teachers want to secure the future for their children. So let's look at it a little critically. What can be secured for our children's future? Okay, perhaps their material situation can be somewhat secured by the actions that we take in the present during childhood. Perhaps. But how do we secure a child's emotional future? And this is what I hear parents saying most often. I just want my child to be happy. Yeah? How are you going to secure future emotional happiness? One thing that we do very well is subject children to harsh conditions as a way to prepare them to be happy and peaceful in the future. And this is the biggest focus. If childhood is filled with anxiety, what gives us the confidence that there can be an emotional future different from the emotional present? And again, like a speaker said in the morning, I think it was Professor Reshma, if we're very honest, there's another psychological movement here. Parental ambitions for their children are not selfless. They're not without a degree of self-aggrandizement. When we say we are proud of our children's accomplishments, and I'm also talking about my students, I see this in myself. There's a lot of self-congratulation going on there. Right? So all these movements within families, schools, and at the individual level, they become amplified and reflected at a broader social level. And now society as a whole has bought into this idea of the child as human capital, as someone into whose education we must invest. And this way of thinking, I think, can be traced to to the rise of capitalism, and it is sustaining during neoliberalism. It's become so normalized, this child as human capital, that even UNICEF, which is an organization with children's well-being at their core, in their South Asia report of 2023, I just quote how they talk about it. They say that our countries need to focus on safeguarding investment in human capital, especially the cognitive capital of children in the early years. By firmly placing children at the heart of economic and social policy, countries in South Asia will reap long-term economic and social benefits. Actually, if you read it from one lens, it seems fine, it seems reasonable, but when I read it with the way I'm reading, with my eyes, it actually is very disturbing to me, this placement of children. And I feel an education based on this view of childhood is ultimately harming children. So what to do? Well, one of the things I'll share in the afternoon from my work at the school is that we believe that any worldview can be questioned, critically examined, and something can be learned and gained from that. For example, here are some questions that I've been exploring for many years in the context of running a school. So, is it a fact or is it a worldview that there are finite and scarce resources, not enough to go around for everybody, and therefore a highly competitive society is inevitable, and therefore everything that follows from it? Is this a fact or is it a worldview? I've been reflecting on this. Is it a fact or a worldview that life is all about getting to the top of some heap or other, making your mark, fulfilling yourself? Yeah, is this a fact or is it a worldview? Anyway, this is something for dialogue. I would have loved to have time to discuss this with participants, but this is a presentation. So I just want to share that, worldviews have the power to shape our lives and society, and often for the worse. A worldview is a rigid, fixed thing. If it is unquestioned, it will shape us for the worse. And so for me and my colleagues, seeing these as worldviews and forms of conditioning and not necessarily facts have really freed us. They've freed us in our own lives and in our ability to create a very different kind of school culture. It's actually even freed the parents of our students, at least that's what many of them say, they share that it has freed them. I'd like to share a short quote here from Krishnamurti, Jiddu Krishnamurti. about this. He says, what has happened to a mind that has been accustomed, trained, educated, conditioned to accept the whole pattern of a life which is based on the future? That has been your way of life. In that is involved the constant effort to become, to achieve, competition, comparison, imitation, the struggle. If intelligently you don't accept that way of living, then what takes place in your mind? Yeah, so this is the question that we have been exploring in our school, and I will share about that, but just in a few sentences. I feel that it follows that any action has to be in the present and for the present. What will free me of conflict today, now? Not what will I do today to be free of conflict tomorrow? And with this view to educate children, it's quite exciting, quite fascinating, quite difficult. And I will share that later. Yes. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Mukunda. It was an enlightening session. And to my mind, we are destroying the childhood of our children, just thinking in terms of the future. And as an adult, we are projecting children as an adult. And by that way, we are destroying the childhood, which is the most precious and most fundamental year of the life of a child. Thank you for highlighting this. Now we have our second speaker, Ms. Bharti Ali. I have the pleasure of sharing diocese committees with her. It will be a delight to hear her. Please come, Bharti.
Thank you so much. We've had some very interesting, I don't know whether to call that worldview, but different views since morning. And I'm going to start with the very first question of what do we mean by child and therefore childhood? Usually, when when I work with the police or the judicial officers, or even people from my own sector, I do tend to ask everyone to shut their eyes for 2 seconds and imagine a child. And I'll ask you all to do that as well. Just for two seconds. Close your eyes, please. I think that's good enough. Could anyone think of a child? Any image of a child that came to your mind? And how old is your child? You as a child. And how old were you in that image? 5 years. Anyone else? Anyone else wants to share? Yes. Just 1 year old. And it's true that when we talk of child, usually, it doesn't go beyond someone who's 10 years old. So here we're talking about childhood, and we need to be clear about what are we talking about, who are we talking about. Someone who's below 10, someone who's above 10, and they all have different childhoods. And I say this because, although the social construct of a child and childhood varies from, every society, every community to community. And for most parents, children will remain children, even if they are married and have their own offsprings. The fact that they remain children for most parents. But that's about a social construct. Then you have the legal construct of childhood, which is pretty unambiguous, fixing the age of child as a person below the age of 18 years, and therefore looking at the entire gamut in just one way. So, unfortunately, today we are facing a crisis with both the social construct as well as the legal construct of child and childhood, especially in the context of various traditions, practices, customs that encompass the existence of persons who are below the age of 18 years. And interestingly, the social construct is not just challenged by those advocating for a universal definition of the child under the human rights framework, but also by those who are ideologically more inclined towards a needs-based welfare model of development. For example, when they ask for a uniform civil code. And on the other hand, many of those advocating for human rights approach are unable to fathom how the age of sexual consent can be lower than the legal age definition of the child as a person below the age of 18 years. So although the rights-based approach recognizes children as individuals with rights that are universal, in many parts of the Asia Pacific, its followers tend to recognize children as a homogeneous group and thus strive towards protecting their universal rights, oblivious of the fact that developmentally there are age variations requiring age-appropriate responses, and that children's situations may vary both individually and in groups. Calling for a flexibility in the approach towards securing every right for every child, as Pooja had also tried to point out in the morning. And in the needs-based welfare model that primarily follows a structural functionalist approach, children remain part of a social organization that decides what is good for them and what they must receive. The similarity in both the approaches is the inherent inequality that governs the social and legal existence of children and defines childhood as a stage requiring interventions from the so-called adults, either in the name of protecting their rights or in the name of social change required to protect the social organization that children are part of. And unless this complexity is addressed, what is it that does not and will not change in the lives of for people who we may call children and adolescents for the lack of getting into the social and legal construct? There are several things that are not going to change. I'll list out just a couple of them today, given the time constraints. But I'll start with corporal punishment that was also talked about in the morning, which is so much a part of our culture and value system. I talked to many IAS officers, who would say that they would have had their father not given them a beating when they did not study. A lot of teachers, and especially the ones who are teaching STEM subjects, think it is impossible to, bring the rigor and discipline required for such subjects without resorting to, some kind of physical and mental torture is what I would put it as. So indeed, they themselves have never experienced any other way and look up at themselves as successful people. Therefore, the beliefs are deeply entrenched. While in a family, both parents resort to different forms of physical and mental cruelty in the name of disciplining children or teaching them the difference between the right and the wrong, in fact, the acceptable and the unacceptable, the mothers are often carved out as the devils, not realizing that women often do it in frustration or their quest for power that they are otherwise deprived of, while fathers use mothers to inflict such disciplinarian methods. For whatever reason, the fact is that corporal punishment continues in different settings. And although we have a law that prohibits corporal punishment in schools and in childcare institutions, we haven't really touched the sphere of home and family. And of course, there is the fear of going the Norwegian way, which only provides further justification for corporal punishment to continue. Law may not be an answer to everything, and certainly to a lot of cultural norms and social norms, which are deeply ingrained in the society. But if not law, then what else? And somewhere a beginning has to be made. Domestic violence is another aspect that will continue. And I was at a workshop with some children in November last month, discussing childhood vulnerabilities and child rights. So when I asked children about their opinion on certain statements, one of the statement was that children run away from their homes because of domestic violence. I got a spontaneous response from this child who said that it's not true. For most children, they get used to it. Uh, they get used to the marital discord between the mother and the father and all the violence that ensues. And let me read out now a paragraph from a report published by an organization called Shakti Shalini that works with survivors of domestic violence and their children. So in this report, they say that childhood environments of violence, abuse, inequality, or discrimination, whether present in domestic spaces, educational institutions, care facilities, neighborhoods, and peer groups, are undoubtedly traumatizing for children. Such experiences of violence in domestic spaces have a far reaching impact on the emotional and mental health of children. Growing up in this manner, children are either direct or indirect victims of violence, and they are likely to learn to normalize violence, thus leading them to commit and or tolerate or permit violence. In effect, gender and sexual violence can be normalized intergenerationally, forming a loop and cycle of violence that is extremely difficult to break as it is rooted in repeated trauma, memory, and experience. So in our confused state of mind, we actually, don't do anything about some of these realities of children. Sex-selective abortions, feticide, infanticide, something which has gone off the radar in our, discussions and our readings and our writings. It seems as if, no news is good news. But, the NFHS 5 may be telling us that sex ratio at birth has improved. But there are several other reports which are also telling us that, a lot of abortions are done clandestinely. Nobody, particularly women, don't want to talk about it. So it happens, somewhere and continues, and it doesn't even get reported. More importantly, there is large amount of information and data that remains uncaptured. It is difficult to know the exact number because the stigma attached to abortion is, or as all of us can understand, too high. And during a recent visit to Rajasthan, it was learned that although hospitals are not supposed to disclose sex of the fetus, they have innovated different ways to share such information with parents to be. There is exchange of sweets in the hospital when a pregnancy is confirmed. If the hospital asks for barfi, it means the newborn will be a boy. So we're quite innovative in many ways. And data on female feticide and infanticide is sort of no longer receives attention, but whether it has been eradicated completely as a practice is a question to start asking ourselves. And I say that because we've also stopped doing a lot of research on some of these issues, thinking it's all over, it's gone. So like I said, sure, I'll just wind up quickly. Child marriage, another problem, and it's no longer only about custom or tradition, but about controlling adolescent sexuality. In many states where children are married off at a very young age, the gona happens after puberty, by the time the girls attain the age of 16 years. And again, from Rajasthan, I'll quote that it has a practice like Ata Sata, where there is exchange of brides within two families. So a girl from one family is given as a bride to another family, and in return, a girl from that other family is brought into this family if they have a son, or even if there is a son in the extended family. Many child marriages take place on religious occasions or as part of other rituals such as Mrityu Bhoj. So if there's an elderly person who has died in the family, there are some rituals, and during that Mrityu Bhoj, while they are serving so many people from the community, they also get their children married off. I will not say that this is done clandestinely, because the authorities are aware of this. So when the GONA is delayed, the children may change their minds in adolescence, or they may find another partner of their choice, which is not acceptable to most families. The combination of tradition, family honor, and the compelling need to control adolescent sexuality with no attention to sexual and reproductive health rights education has actually messed up the lives of both children and adolescents. It does not help when higher education gets privatized or when there is a merger of schools that make schools distant for girls. The system, as in the government system, only further adds to the traditional woes. The only solution that then gets promoted is the use of law. But the law is always used selectively. The number of cases registered under the Prohibition of Child Marriage Act in 2022 is only 1,002 across the entire country. Whereas the NFHS 5 data tells us that 23.3% women aged 20 to 24 years were married before the age of 18. So there's this data mismatch, which is telling us that law is not really something people want to use. To begin with, no injunction or stay on a child marriage is taken despite such provisions in the law. There is obviously appeasement of the communities because the authorities are not acting despite such provisions in law. Then laws like the POCSO Act, which deal with sexual offences against children and has raised the age of sexual consent to 18 years, are being used increasingly in cases where girls and boys marry underage out of their choice, and that too if the alliance is intercaste or interreligious. So that selective use of law to criminalize childhood agency is something that we are witnessing day in and day out today. Punish the young so that they learn is the underlying sentiment here too. To conclude, I would have actually liked to touch on a lot many other issues, early childhood care and development, for instance, being one of those, and the increased privatization of that as well. The issue of children with disabilities who remain on the margins and never really get a place sufficient enough in our policy making as well as planning and implementation of programs. There are children of prisoners, children of sex workers, children of seasonal migrant workers such as those in the brick kilns and sugarcane industry. Their childhoods are so different, with no access to education because they are on the move, 6 to 8 months at the brick kilns and then going back to their village, not accepted either in the school in the village or in the school in the destination areas. So there are so many complexities that we need to start looking at. And for now, I will say that the fear of the unknown, in the context of what I said previously, it's the fear of the unknown being adolescence, the fear of losing one's control or power because children and adolescents have more knowledge and exposure that renders. I'm just finishing in. Yeah, finishing in a minute. So because they have more knowledge and exposure, which renders most parents incapable of actually dealing with it, leading to new practices of violence against children or new forms of child abuse with serious mental health implications for children and adolescents. Recognition of their agency and ensuring their participation in matters that concern them is resisted and therefore yet to become a norm. There is no scope for dialogue, discussion with people who are the most affected by the decisions we take for them. So amidst all these issues, I will finally say that there is need for a lot more research, empirical research in the fields of sociology, anthropology, and psychology to generate evidence that can guide us in our understanding of changing childhoods, our thinking, policy making, planning, and implementation. And a conference like this can actually make a beginning. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Bharti Ali, for this such insightful deliberation. Yeah, violence with children, whether it's domestic violence, national violence, international violence. The first sufferer are our children. We must keep it in mind uh, that violence is basically a violence against childhood. Bharti asked us to close our eyes for 2 seconds. We did it. The two responses which came were very, very personal. Somebody, she told that she thought of her childhood. Somebody told that he thought of his 3 years old, 1 year old daughter. We have to come out of that. In the first session, we talked of best interest of the child. A child can be any child. That we will have to keep in mind. We have to broaden our horizon now, our spectrum for children. And thank you. And the next speaker is Mr. Abhijit Nirmal. He is Deputy Director, Child Protection in Bal Raksha Bharat. Abhijit.
Dear Chair and dear co-panelist, academician, practitioner, and students. I'm basically a practitioner, and so we'll talk about the childhood and in South Asia. See, first of all, in my last 20 years of my work, very few a time I have attended these kind of conferences where we are going to discuss about the childhood as a whole. Childhood, when we say like Bharti said, he said, and other people also actually corrected it by saying is the childhood when we remember about very early stages of life. But childhood has different stages, we all know. And we are talking about starting from the early age, then the toddler, then the early schooling age, then the school age, adolescent. And all stages has a different kind of childhood because when we talk about a child, we can't talk only about a child. We have to talk about the mother also. We have to talk about the family. We have to talk about the caregivers. So childhood actually, many of the adults says that the best period of their life was a childhood. Many of the people says, what is why? Because they find it more controlled when they become adult. Does they feel more stressed when they become adult? Does they still feel the childhood has less stress, less anxiety? But if you see the reality, we are talking about South Asia. South Asia is interconnected when we talk about India and other neighboring countries in South Asia. There are many community, urban and rural divide, economic divide, then the dense geography in this region, a lot of intersection with the cultural traditional practices. We are talking about that region. Ideally, the childhood should be celebrated, and we do celebrate. In our traditions, also most of the religion that and the caste, everything we are living, coexisting, we celebrate childhood. Only thing is, we celebrate sometimes differently when it's come to gender. Unfortunately, a boy is more celebrated than the girl child birth is. And who set these norms? So now norms start settling right at the time of birth or pre-birth. See, it start from the pregnancy. What Bharti was also referring that prenatal diagnostics are done in different pages. So actually, we are actually defining a different kind of childhood right from the stages when the mother is pregnant, and it's continued. When we compare it with South Asian and other Western countries, you will find that South Asian children, the way we take care of those children, are like more flexible, more lenient at the stage of toddler. Why so? Are we really very lenient and flexible? You see, there are norms that have set up this thing. One of the key norms is the gender norms. because gender, the mother is a primary caretaker and she has to take care of the child. She has to abide by her flexible time in the macro family setting. They are lenient in food practices also, because if you talk about the Western countries, the doctor suggests that every 4 hours you feed a child, create a timeline. But in India, every time, any time when that mother gets time, she will breastfeed her or provide some milk, because she is engaged into different kind of work, and the time is dependent upon the role and division that is taking place into the family setting. Even in the and one of the reason is also why mother wants to feed every time to the child, because nutrition is also related to gender issues and it's historical also. If you see the nutrition in our traditions, the agriculture, pregnant and lactating mothers gets different kind of high protein kind of uh, laddus, which is prepared by pulses, ghee, and some dry fruits, which is available mostly in the affluent family. But traditionally, it was thought that okay, during the pregnancy, we give those kind of food. At least the child will be uh, less underweight. But that will not happen if you are giving a superfood, or if you are not just providing 1 month's time, will not result into that. So the expectations of the parents begin at that time. This is the best period when the leniency and the flexible approach is done. But everything is the mother is the person who is last eating in the family. And even after all those kind of food practices, undernutrition continues. So right from the childhood, there is effect also on the undernutrition. There are also lack of awareness and in our traditions also. You see, doctors suggest that uh, at the birth, provide the clean clothes. And our traditions, which is still prevalent in many places, are providing old clothes to the newborn child. Even in Delhi, I have seen in the big hospitals, they say that we don't provide separate cloth at the birth because few families follow those kind of norms. It's prevalent. So the scientific knowledge is that okay, you provide the clean clothes which are not infectious, but traditions are like that, where the even the informed, educated people follow this tradition. So at a time we are very lenient and flexible in caring our newborn, but we are very stringent in following the traditions and culture. And these traditions and culture many a times can be also. So that is one thing. That is a contrast. We follow. There is a common practices that we always follow is that celebration, any caste, any religion, any are celebrated, naming a child, unperson, start of education also. There may be much more thing which may be common. The next stage is the toddler stage. At the toddler stage also, we continue with the same kind of leniency. And if you contrast it with our practices in the Western practices, the regulation starts at the Western countries, at least teaching them something. That the uh, sanitation practices and all, they start at least providing some kind of education, independent sleeping time and all those things. But in our culture, toddler is also a baby period. We make them continue as a baby. And once the preschool stage comes, we suddenly want our preschool children to follow a routine. Get up early in the morning, go to school, start for at least stay in a preschool for 3-4 hours, and now we started putting pressure on the children at the preschool only. That start. At least even the preschool is not very much prevalent all around the country. But with the ECC and a lot of uh, urbanization and this early childhood schools, KG schools coming, at least the ECC practices are coming. But we are not preparing our children and childhood to be independent at that stage. and we want to regulate them suddenly. So their stress level increases at this stage. The other norms which also set is the gender norms. And this is the stage when the children start understanding. And children are also informed that this is how you are boy, you are girl, this is how you have to live, this is how you have to behave. It's just up to 6 years. Also, the traditional and religious practices starts here. And children adopt without questioning anything because this is the stage where they can't question. The next stage where we talk about the school age and the most critical phase of childhood, where the children are regulated. Now, children are regulated and expectations become very high. You have to perform. You have to perform at every stage. You have to be top. And the stress and anxiety starts at this level because suddenly child has to perform. They have to live in a up to like till the time adolescent age come. They have to follow all rules and norms. What are the rules or norms? The family also set up the respect all the elder. And this is a universal rule. And in return, they also the love, affection, or everything will be fulfilled by the family, but there are some conditions which also comes at this stage. You behave like this, you respect the elders, you do a good study, you continue to be a topper, everything will be provided. But at a time, if you're not doing well, the same harsh punishment start. The violence start. This is the harsh reality. The expectations, love, affection, if they are getting through a conditions, then what kind of children and the childhood we are giving and what kind of adult we are preparing. Respecting elder people is fine, but respecting all the elder people and not questioning is one of the reason of child abuse also. How a child has so much fear to question because the child knows at this stage, I can't raise a question against this person. I can't ask. I can't complain because there are expectations, there are conditions involved with that. And that is also one of the reasons of child abuse. Competitiveness. If you see, the Indian kids are generally up to 6 years, they are living in a very lenient kind of conditions and a flexible situation, and suddenly in the school age, they get into a tough competition. And Indian child generally are emotional in that sense. So competitiveness actually in their curiosity. They are more into reading, getting marks and all those things. And gender discrimination obviously get more stringent at this time. All the norms are set. All the norms at this stage because we are not providing those kind of educational services or education curriculum is not like that. So at this stage, all the gender norms are set. Adolescent stage, which the stage where our tradition is to control and regulate a child. And at this stage, child wants more independent socialization, but we all have controlled about the religious socialization process, whom to socialize with who economic criteria is also there. You have to socialize with the poor or the rich or like-minded people, like earning positions people, English speaking, Hindi speaking, different kind of socialization also even controlled by the parents at this time. Gender norms play a clear role. Now at this adolescent stage, boys start going outside, socialize, play outdoor games, whereas the girls are more controlled into the four wall. You are adolescent, you have to live within the home. And these control and expectations, the control and expectations also increases the risk of harmful practices. The expectations are normal expectation now are adolescent, you have to earn something. So the child labor result into that. You are now adolescent and the age gradually you will get into a marriage. So contribute to the household costs. The girls are now started working at the home many a times, and traffickers also uses these situations. So child trafficking, economic exploitation, sexual exploitation. The child is more at the risk at this stage, and all because all gender play a key roles. So basically, these are various stages that the childhood is being practiced and the traditions are effective in impacting the children. But good that we are here to discuss this thing. And there is a lot of research, I'm sure, lot of research, information, awareness is required. Lot of intervention on the educational curriculum is required, right? Because we can't say suddenly that say we want a gender mainstream society at the age of 21 years by providing gender sensitization workshop for 2 days. When this gender norms, traditions, culture, everything is in our ways of practice and belief. We need more awareness and information also to our parents, and it can be done through the academics, civil society organizations, so that parents are also informed about the tools, techniques that can help them in at least not regulating so much, but providing a child a real childhood. Childhood should be celebrated. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Viji. Your deliberations show the amount of experience you have working with the children. It's really praiseworthy. You discussed about various phases. You discussed about gender bias, which is very, very prominent right now in whole of the South Asia. We will not be taking a lot of time and inviting Dr. Pathak.
Thank you, sir. Try to be very precise so that we have some time left for Q&A. So in the middle of the discussion that we have had, which gives us various images of children, ideas of childhood, which are primarily under certain kind of conditions, not very desirable, and it tends to directions in those conditions so that we could arrive at the situation where childhood could be celebrated for its due merit, and the idea that there is a socio-normative world which plays very important role in the way our experience of children's experience of childhood is affected. It is in that context that I come up with this proposition that probably there is necessity of exploring multiple images of children and diverse registers of the experience of childhood. And probably with that diverse register of experiences and multiple images of children, we will also be able to explore the possibility of making those necessary corrective, coming up with corrective measures. And in that regard, I try to delve into this area, which is very tyrannical, and it's the area of tradition, right? I say it's tyrannical because it's entirely up to the mind that is trying to decipher tradition. It is entirely up to the intentionality of the actor, the reader who is trying to read a tradition. One can make a monster out of it, and one can make something equally marvelous out of it. So I do not know in which direction I am going, and I am completely at your mercy to stop me or correct me if I am going monstrous way. To begin with, I thought it's necessary to recall, few nuggets from the everyday encounter through which we get a sense about the kind of childhood that we come across, particularly for anthropologists. Autoethnography has become almost a normative methodology. So to begin with, we look at ourselves as to what I have come across in my day-to-day life. And the kind of nuggets that I would share with you, they take me invariably in that domain which I call tyrannical traditional domain. So some of these nuggets I have gathered with this eavesdropping. Sounds like a bad idea. One should not be doing. Ethically, one should not be doing this thing called eavesdropping. But again, anthropologists are trained to be good eavesdroppers. So without that, their business will be incomplete. So by eavesdropping, I gather that this brother and sister are conversing. Age 6 sister, age 10 brother, and they come up with these very strange kind of ideas. These are mostly one-liners that I will share with you, but those one-liners can give you some kind of leaf about what I am referring to. So the daughter tells the brother, "No, our father is a very cute baby." Right. I see, role reversal. His father becomes a cute baby. Then there is another conversation where the daughter responds to father because the father habitually, or for some reason, when the father become too lovey-dovey to a daughter, they call their daughter also beta. So the daughter corrects him and says, "I'm not a beta, I'm a beti." Right? Something which elsewhere some of the feminist scholars have talked about, that this assertion is the first original assertion of a feminist cell when the girl child says that I'm a girl child, I have no problem in accepting it and saying it, and you must acknowledge me as such. There is another conversation where a friend of the daughter, the brother, asks sister, "Are you Hindu?" The sister replies, "Yes, I am." So that's where it ends. So which was, I mean, very interesting because it does not lead you in some of those directions where, as an adult, I would expect it to go. It stops there. "Yes, I am." So there is another conversation in which the brother is being asked about the religious identification, and the brother says, "I'm an atheist." After a while, the brother adds to it, says, "It's too much of work to think about what is my religion." So there is another conversation between brother and sister in which uh, the brother says that you should not tire out our father after he comes back from home. The sister says, "The father can never get tired. He's like a tree." So many things, reaffirmation of some of those stereotypical ideas, some of those normative conditions, the socialization, so on and so forth. It takes us to that typical domain of sociological reasoning where we try to understand very critically what are the social rules. But they also take us to another domain which was very significant at the advent of 19th century with the turn of industrial civilization, which was such a massive value transformation that the society required a doctor of its own kind. His name was Sigmund Freud, who had to analyze people because people were not very sure as to how to deal with the various kind of experiences in the situation of changing value. So with this Dr. Freud, we understood one of the basic tenets very well, that our dreams are king's highway. This is how he says, dreams are king's highway to unconscious world. But it took us some time to wait for the daughter of this doctor, Anna Freud, to come to the picture and tell us something more. And Anna Freud had to tell us that children's experience of childhood is actually a revelation of that unconscious world, right? Which is very interesting juxtaposition if we do between father and daughter, Freud father, Freud daughter. This gives us a sense. Anna Freud used to work with school children, and she used to listen to school children's stories. And through those stories, she tried to make sense of what kind of subject formation they were having. Now, with this, it becomes necessary for us to ask few fundamental questions as to how does really a child subjectively experience childhood. And that requires us to take this route, even if we find it a little too complicated at times, slightly arcane at times, but it is not that arcane. It was not very arcane for someone called Virendra Shekhar Bose in the early 20th century in India, born in the city which is also my hometown, which happens to be my hometown, Darbhanga in Bihar. and practiced psychoanalysis in Patna and Calcutta, did a PhD in psychology at Calcutta University. And that PhD thesis was a challenge to Freud's theory of repression, unconscious repression. And to challenge that theory of Freud, he had to refer to not Freudian psychoanalysis, he had to refer to other kind of texts, such as Purush Sukta, such as Upanishad, and most importantly, Mahabharata. And he came up with this idea that this very strong image of child that is Oedipal in nature, which has been popularized thanks to Dr. Freud, is not necessarily correct for all kind of cultural contexts. Because Oedipus in Greco-Roman tradition may suffer from this guilt, this primeval guilt, and that guilt is associated with this necessity of defeating the authority figure, father figure, killing the father figure, defeating the authority figure in order to accomplish the development of, psychic development of the child. That was necessary in the Oedipal complex. Girinder Shekhar Bose tried to suggest that this guilt, the situation of guilt does not arise in some other cultural contexts. Why? Because that defeating authority figure is almost an accepted dharma. Like he gives the example from Mahabharata that over there, defeating the authorities is almost dharma. If Pandavas do not defeat the powerful people and they do not take revenge, probably they would be compromising on their dharma, so and so forth. This long story, I have tried to cut it short to help ourselves understand one very, very important thing, that there is a realm of inquiry yet to be unearthed, and that realm of inquiry requires us to take note of mythology and folklore, which may be very slippery area, but if A.K. Ramanujan had given us so many things in reference to those materials, and so many things which are very subversive in nature, then what stops us from taking risk? And it is after Girinder Shekhar Bose and this opening of this new, this whole domain of inquiry with reference to South Asian mythology and folklore, that some of the other psychoanalysts have started examining the role of another mythological icon from the Hindu worldview, that is Ganesha. And the idea is that, the Ganesha, the juxtaposition of Ganesha and Kartikeya is a wonderful example to understand as to what kind of and how different kind of experience of childhood might unfold in this kind of cultural context. So we are all familiar from the folklore we have learned. Do stop me if I'm sitting down. We are familiar since our childhood that when they had to appear for a test in front of their parent, Kartikeya took his vehicle and went on a world voyage and became an encyclopedist philosopher, so and so forth. Very well learned man. Whereas Ganesha just took a round of the parent and declared himself graduated. That, this is sufficient for me. I do not want to know more about the world. We might find it very funny, but then we also hear from folklore, yes, that the same Ganesha was approached by Vedavyasa when he had to find, when Vedavyasa had to find a scribe to write this story called Mahabharata. This is all folklore. I'm not getting into the business of historical verification. That headache I leave it to historians. The idea here, however, is that there are these multiple models which come to us if we try to explore them. And through those multiple models, one can get into the nitty-gritty intricacies of the cultural experience of childhood. Likewise, not only in this case, not only in the Ganesha syndrome is very well analyzed in psychoanalysis. Nachiketa from Kathopanishad is yet to be analyzed. And Nachiketa too, Nachiketa did not suffer from any guilt. Instead, his father was, he was guilty that his father was not performing his duty. King Vajrashava was not performing his duty. And therefore, he went in the plot situation, he went to have a dialogue with Yama, and he emerged as one of those earliest quintessential, you can say existential child philosopher, not king philosopher, child philosopher from in the Upanishadic context. Likewise, one can go into the realm of very, very vast realm of folklore. The place where I come from and where Girinder Shekhar Bose, a Bengali psychoanalyst, was born, that whole area is called Mithila. And in Maithili, there is a folk festival. It's called Sama Chakeba festival, which is very popular amongst folk to celebrate the filial bonding, brother and sisters bonding. And this is a story basically about Sama and Chakema. Sama was a girl who was banished into wilderness. The story unfolds all kind of stereotypes, and it also unfolds this possibility of a girl child banished into wilderness, bringing up subversive possibilities in a cultural context, which would challenge the authority figure, right? And of course, there is also this involvement of this stereotypical role of a brother who would be always in support of the sister. But then these are the stories through which one can get into the thickness of cultural script that is all around us, and we are yet to take note of them. This is not to deny that modern popular cultural scripts also bring about a moment of invented traditions. And through those invented traditions, all kind of politics one can understand. All kind of politics may happen in the wake of invented traditions. However, with that kind of caution, one can still take note of some of these, details coming from different kind of cultural contexts. This is just in short. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Pathak. It's what I think it's your lecture was such a superb lecture based on so many ethical issues. But for me, the takeaway is your sentence that the society needs doctors of its own kind. What I think is not only the society, every segment of the society. The issues are so much. What I mean to say is so visible, so separate from each other that we need doctors, to several types of doctors, social doctors, academicians, child rights activists to deal with the issues. Thank you very much. Now we have 15 minutes of open house. Any question from the esteemed panel? Please. You introduce yourself.
I'm Salim, and my question was something that emerges from actually personal experience, actually. And in our country, when we in the context of changing childhoods, and if we were to talk about adoption, and so in our country, an unmarried male is not eligible to adopt a girl child. And so I just want to ask that is this a deprivation of the opportunity for a good life for the girl child to which she has a right? And moreover, is this because of the preconceived notion that is stereotypical towards men as preliminary? Thus diminishing the sanctity of the father daughter bond. Okay. The question is actually for anybody to come.
I think you take all the questions first and then another question. Any other question?
Professor Martin spoke about this very strong childhood position that children often make. And then he just spoke about how gender norms are instituted from a very early stage. And then he specifically came up 2 days of sensitization workshop about movement. Now, and you specifically okay, what the two of them are trying to in terms of creating a differentiation between the future and the dating the children to the very futuristic view and understanding what is want from the parents. Now, my observation is specifically with respect to LGBT individuals, software individuals, the act of identifying themselves is taken as an act of agency. Now, when does agency come in a being? The children are not seen as somebody having agency. So, in your experience of being a teacher what is in your experience with the notion of the child, it is one present sense of gender? What is something very different from what is in
Any more question? Any questions, please?
So my name is Shreya, and thanks for this wonderful session. And my question is related to Kamala. It was absolutely brilliant to listen to. As a parent as well, I think we relate when you say, we're constantly sort of training our kids to a very future-oriented, uh, you know, which brings about its own sort of stresses and anxiety on students. Sort of getting them to post become mature, before their time. So my question to you is, what can we do as society, also as schools as well as parents, to sort of step it along back? Given that we're living very sort of high pressure times where everything is ASAP culture, what can we do to really sort of preserve their innocence as well as sort of let them gently discover what their purpose is? And in that sense, I'm talking about who they are. So my question is to Father sir. So this is more about the stand of autoethnography in childhood studies as such. Because I also am in line with your thinking that there is a requirement for us to start personal narratives and talk about our, like how we started today's session, personal is really powerful, personal is like so, and at the same time, we have people like Shashank, like how he asked us to come out of the cartoon when thinking about ourselves in the place of children. So, we are in an academic forum which has a lot of contradictions. So, to be a researcher and to subjectify yourself in place of, that whole subject of the research, right? Bringing in your experience to being a child. How do you put that forward, or how do you academize it, or how do you start talking about your personal things in the forum to make it more topic? How I think we're already in the journey of your
First question is related to adoption by a single male person and adoption of a girl child. I think
adoption is anyways a domain that requires so much more work. Because again, culturally there are different practices when it comes to adoption. Now, when the law was being made, it was being revised from what is known as the Hindu Adoption and Adoption Act. And provisions were brought into what is now known as the Juvenile Justice Act. Somewhere, there was this consciousness about the possibility of girls likely to be abused, sexually abused. And therefore, those kind of provisions have come into the law. My problem is that, there was consciousness about girls being sexually abused, but what about boys being sexually abused? We still have. So if it's about single parent adoption, irrespective of the sex of the child they are adopting, we need to look at the safety issues of both boys and girls, and also look at or understand single parent adoption as a possibility that can exist with certain safeguards. we're not really ready for those safeguards. We're not you have follow-up mechanisms put in place. Invest in those follow-up mechanisms. So if you actually ask me, since we've been looking at budgets for so many years now, the government of India spends only 0.04% of its budget on child protection, which is 4 paise out of 100 rupees. That's it. And in that, it's everything. Adoption is the lowest in that. So, issues actually boil down to those realities. Then the issue of persons who are from the LGBTQI community, whether they can adopt, is another aspect to also be put into. And why can they not adopt? We're talking about their marriage, which the Supreme Court has declined. So there are many other new and emerging issues that we have to start talking about, and also then looking at children, parents, parenthood, childhood. Single parent has also been a unit, and kind of parenthood, yes. We'll have to start looking at all of this.
Can I add something? Because I'm a profession. Okay. We have precedents from several Supreme Courts. Even a biological document is not handed over to her in case of a divorce.
Up to a certain number of years.
Actually, that's up to the age of 18 years. That's maximum. So it has flown from there also. Next, ma'am, is a question.
About the question of gender identity in school and when it comes about and how it plays out, right? This is one of those very difficult questions where, to separate nature and nurture. How do you separate biology from socialization? I think the powers of socialization are so strong that in spite of the fact that in our school, I think the salience of being of a particular gender is quite low. I remember growing up, and I grew up in an all-girls school, and I didn't think about being a girl. And when I went to 11th standard to a co-ed school, suddenly that was all I could think of. I'm a girl, I'm a girl, I'm a girl, right? But our school is co-ed, but our children, I think, don't think much about it. It's not very salient, which is a part of creating a good culture, I feel. But at the same time, the biology of being, and this is a very complex question. It is not just X, 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 Y, there are continua, there is spectrum in this, right? That does express itself, and we do see that. We do see that in the middle school, girls wanting to play with each other, boys with each other. We have, and then they come back together again. And it is all held in the spirit of dialogue, with them, and inquiry, and a genuine sense of respect and affection for everyone, regardless of gender, regardless of how you look, regardless of what language you speak, regardless of what you like and don't like, and your abilities. Gender is just one of them. It's not and we do have children since the last few years who have been able to come out and say that I don't think I'm a boy, though he's been seen as a boy all his life. I don't think so. And we've said, okay, we'll talk about it later. Let's just see how it unfolds. A couple of months later, he's fallen in love with a girl. He's also confused. And but it's lovely to see that they are able to express that confusion and it is held without having to fix it. And the other question, thank you for your words. I think that the only thing I can say in response to the how do we fix it question is for each of us to recognize in ourselves that we ourselves are future oriented. In the sense, it's very hard for me to be in the present. There's such a constant sense of preoccupation and haste. And I'm always 5 minutes or 5 years in the future. And this thing of I can't wait for, I'm looking forward to, it is something that's in our psyche. I think unless I can recognize it in myself and learn how to be more present, then we need to make a difference It is more at the individual level. I don't think we can bring in change for this from above. I don't think.
Very simple. It's very, it's a common thing that we do, like connecting micro with macro. It's connecting these particular instances with the larger questions. If one can analytically connect them, if one can analyze some of these nuggets that I referred to in the larger context, with the context where the debates on social stereotypes, say for example, when a child says, father cannot get tired in the gym. So one can get into the whole masculinity debate and as to how this such a small thing can lead you to understand the perpetual reaffirmation of the masculinity, certain kind of masculinity, the monochromatic masculinity, masculinity which man is not supposed to get tired. So one small fragment can take into large interest. And if one can connect that large macro debate into these micro instances, autoethnography can be, for your concern is, can be academic. My problem, however, is not necessarily to make it academic, therefore do autoethnography in this time. My interest is, however, to minimize this another problem that we have suffered since the advent of modern knowledge systems. Whenever we want to know something, we know about other activities. It is always the other that we look for. In that context, if we persist in that manner, the child becomes the other points. Like primitive society was the other point for this for a long time. Likewise, child will become other for us. And probably this is the reason why sociology of childhood is very core field of inquiry in India and South Asia. Because we do not know how to handle this child. Can we really clear it other, or we can part of it and then we can carry it out from there and inquiry. So when I say that autoethnography component is necessary, it is primarily to create a new kind of intellectual politics in which other is not being fashion, you would be out of fashion. Instead, the interactive correlation between self and other would be more.
So thank you everybody. Here, Mr. Pathak, Aarti, Mr. Ajit, and Madam. Thank you, thanks a lot.
Thank you everyone for such a illuminating session. Lunch is served and we shall reconvene at 2:30. The volunteers, please help the participants and speakers get to the respective rooms for the session.